Hi guys, welcome to today's video. I've changed my microphone and video settings, so hopefully a little bit better quality as we move forward here. But let's talk about building a giant KitCard mech.
Okay, so the kit card that I printed is the Waldwoke American Mecha Card Kit, and this is by Woke STL Works. I will link them in the description, but this is on Colts 3D. This is a free file. I do suggest, tipping. It helps designers like them and many others continue to create these files that we enjoy printing. This prints without supports, and it comes with the kit card and then also a hex base. So I downloaded this and got it set up in my slicer. So let's take a look at that. Okay, I've got the kit card imported into Cura here. You can see on the left, I've got the original kit card size. And then here on the right, I've got the kit card enlarged 430%, which takes up about the entire bed of my Cobra Max, which is roughly 16 by 16. Probably could have made it slightly larger, but 430% sounded like a pretty good amount. I've got this set to run at 0.12 layer height, and it's going to take a couple days to run, but it doesn't need supports, so this should be a pretty straightforward print here. So we are now going to go to the time lapse and take a look at the finished print.
Now, is this the most efficient way to print a giant mech on my printer? No. But is it fun? Yes. Alright guys, here is the completed kit card. We'll take a closer look at this in a second. I just want to show for reference, this is the original size kit card, and this is the obviously larger version I printed on my Cobra Max. This is at 430%. I think overall it turned out really well. There are a few minor issues. Let me see if we can see. Let me try to zoom in on this here. I've got a few gaps in the top which didn't print completely clean on the top surfaces. So I'll do a little bit of cleanup on that. And then one thing I kind of thought about after I started printing all this is I'm guessing, and we'll see once we get into it here, but I'm wondering if some of these layers will have infill, so that way I'll have to fill gaps where some of these pieces connect. I probably could have done, a minimum of a certain amount of layers are just solid. But, it's one of those things you think about after you start a couple-day print. But anyway, I am going to get this cut up here and take a look at the individual pieces and do some cleanup. So, yeah, I think overall really happy with how this turned out. I think it's really cool to just see a giant piece kit card like this. Very excited to get started and get assembling this. So let's get it cut up here. Alright, so I didn't cut this exactly close just yet. I kind of want to do some rough cuts just to get it close, and then I'll probably do some finer cuts with some different clipping shears. So, yep, alright, looking good. Let's continue on with the work. Alright, that's the bulk of the pieces all cut out here. I left some other bits that I can get in a little closer. I'm going to use some better shears for that. I just wanted to get everything free so I'll have easier access to it with the better shears. We can take another closer look at this. You can kind of see some small areas that I want to clean up. I want things like the cockpit clean, so I'll probably do some light sanding, do some light filling on this. And then if you can see, I think there's going to be some infill on some of these, but we'll get it clean cut. But there'll definitely be sanding on all these parts. Just make sure everything goes together. But, excited to see this thing actual size. Will be pretty cool. So I'm going to continue cutting with the different shears and then move on to sanding. I got my Citadel cutters here, so these will be a little bit easier to cut the close bits. So I'm going to get to that and do some more cutting here. Alright, so that's all the parts cut. I haven't dry fit checked anything yet. I'll do that once I get some parts initially sanded here. I'm sure I'll have to do some additional cleanup on things like that. overall, I think the cuts look pretty good. Some of these parts, like this, will be hidden as this slides into here, so I don't have to worry about cleanup on all the parts, but you can definitely tell on some of these that obviously I was cutting the infill. There's clearly a gap here. I'll zoom in. So clearly there's a gap here that I'll have to fill on some of these, but I'm going to move on to sanding. I'm not going to sand, every surface here, but some of these were a little bit rougher or need a little bit of rework. So I'm going to certainly sand down connection points and then do some filling and then sanding after I do some of the filling as well. So let's get to that part of it. All right, so I've got some 150 grit sandpaper. I'll be using this to sand down the high portions and clean up some of the parts. I usually start with 150 and then probably go to like a 400. Between 150 and 200, kind of depends what I have around. So that's what we'll get started with here. All right, now that I got a lot of the high spots sanded off, I'm going to go back in, get these rinsed off, get all the dust off them, and then go back and start filling some of these parts, and then move on to the next steps. All right, so we are going to move on to filling. So again, we've got some gap where there is some infill where we cut the connections at, and then I will need to do some additional cleanup, but I will do that after I get the holes filled. So holes, and then also there's a few sections here where I want to try to fill in on some of these top spots where there's a little bit of gap in the printing. And then I will probably spray everything with a filler primer and then do some more cleanup before we move into assembly. As far as filling, you can use a variety of things. Green stuff will work, which is a 2-part putty. I'll actually be using a wood filler. This is like a little putty that comes out. It sands really well. I use it for a lot of cosplay props, but this will fill pretty easily and sand very nicely, and you can smooth it out pretty quickly. So I've got some of that off to the side. I'm going to put on a glove and then have a cup of water to smooth things out with. So let's get to filling. So we're going to let this dry and get this sprayed with the wood filler. All right, so everything has been hit with filler primer. It filled in a lot of the gaps pretty well. You can see most of these gaps are filled in up here. This is the one I added the putty to. The one thing is I think I did a little bit overspray, and that's part of the reason why there's still some gaps here. As you can see, some of this detail is filled in right here. But overall, it smoothed everything out pretty well. So that's this piece. You can see on the legs, sprayed, smoothed out a lot of things. So I'm still gonna hit with it some additional sanding and cleanup here. So I'll do some of that, and then we will get ready for assembly. All right, let's get to it. All right, the parts have been sprayed with the filler, cleaned up after that. You can see on here, like I cleaned up some of this detail a little bit to dig out where some of that filler primer was. I'll probably still need some additional cleanup. You can still see there's a few rough spots here. But I kind of wanted to move forward with getting this assembled and then kind of do some additional cleanup after that, because I know I'm going to have to do some trimming. Like for example, these parts slide together, but right now there's too much interference, so I need some more cleanup there. And then also, being that this was a kit card designed to be much smaller, some of these pieces like this, would be flexible if they were tiny, but due to this size, they're pretty stiff. So I know there's going to be more cleanup for sure. And then some of these things I think I'm going to have to trim. Like some of these parts have like an inner support. I think I might have to cut that out to be able to bend these a little bit more, just because, yeah, this is so much bigger. It just has a lot of rigidity to it that a small part would not. So I'm going to start working on assembly. I don't think I'm going to put this on a base. I was debating about doing like a specific like rock for a foot pose, but once we get this assembled, I might think about that. But right now we're just going to work on getting everything fit together try to do some test dry fitting. This usually pops together, so I'll have to kind of be careful, feel it out, and see how this starts to go together, and then just make sure everything gets glued together for it as well. So let's get to it. All right, there's a lot of cleanup work I had to do to get everything ready, but I think things should be ready to go to snap together. I did actually glue these pieces together. You can see there's a bit of a gap here, so I'll probably be going back through once I've got everything fixed. Again, this is a kit card, not really a full-size mech, so I expect there to be some other gaps and things, but I'll probably go back through and fill things once I have everything assembled. But now we're going to move into gluing and getting this part assembled. So without a further ado, I'm actually going to be using some Elmer's here, which is not something you'd expect, but actually I want a little bit of time for everything sets up. I think Elmer's tends to work pretty well, and any runoff is going to turn clear. Super glue, I'm not going to have a lot of time to work with if I run into any issues. So this will hold pretty strong, and then it'll give me some time to work with things. So let's get started and glue everything together. I'm going to start with the main canopy here. Alright, when trying to fit this together, if you can see, I actually fractured the PLA a little bit here. So I did end up cutting out the center section. So if you look, this one's got a center block to it on the right, whereas this one on the left doesn't. So I cut that out, and I'm hoping that'll allow this to flex enough to pop in. So let's try that. All right, it's in. Fantastic. All right, so he is assembled except for his right arm. Unfortunately, he's a little... I'm going to adjust his legs a little bit. So we will let this set up and then come back. Elmer's glue is not the fastest, which is part of the reason, like I said, why I chose it. But after 24 hours, it should be reasonably set up. And then I will come back, glue in his other arm, and then get to the initial spray paint on this. I'm going to base it in black and then move on to the paint job. So we'll wait 24 hours off screen. For you, it'll be an instant. And we'll be back in a few. All right, so I've gone ahead, I've completed assembly. I did put on the arm without actually any fill in. I think it's a pretty small gap. I was worried that if I filled that with the wood putty, it wouldn't be able to get that area as smooth as I'd like. I think it's pretty non-obvious as it is right now, so I decided to kind of leave it and then just base the whole part in black. And then I've really been agonizing over what color scheme I want to go with. I think I'm going to base this in a Caliban green and then do some highlights moving up with an airbrush. So I debated about doing the whole thing in like a silver with some dry brush. I don't know. You know, it's always agonizing to do a color scheme. So right now my plan is to go out, do this base this in the Caliban green spray paint, and then come back with an airbrush. So once we come back here, this thing will be based in green, and then we'll get to a more detailed paint job. So I'm starting off here with a warp stone glow, and I'm trying to hit the high spots on here and a little bit extra. So the legs, arms coming down from a top down direction with this airbrush. I gotta say, I resisted the airbrush for a long time, but ever since picking one up and getting more used to it, it's been a great help for large models and blending colors together. Next we got a moot green, and this is hitting more just the highlights. Again, the upper portions of the arms, top of the armor, cockpit, legs, things like that. Really just making the top surfaces pop. Again, not overdoing it, but just enough to get some nice highlights in there. Next, I did a Nuln Oil wash over the entire piece. And in this, I'm coating all the surfaces. I'm making sure to get in all the crevices, This will help make the model stand out a little bit better and really highlight those dark recesses that are on there. Now, one thing, we spend a lot of time building up highlights with the airbrush, so what I'm also doing is if there's too much excess Nuln Oil on the surface, I'm taking my brush, drying it off, and then wiping that surface a little bit more clear. So it's got some wash on it, but not too much excess to leave streaks. Next, we're moving on to the missile pods. I started with a corn red, and this is covering the entire circle of those missile pods. So I'm hitting the whole round surface with my brush, covering every little part of it. Then next I used Evil Sun Scarlet, and this is more just the top half of the sphere, if you can think of the top down half. So I'm hitting every one of those. Then next is a Wild Rider Red, and this is just basically a line on the very top center of the sphere. So not too much, just to make a slight kind of point on the top part of the surface. Then I moved on to some Lead Belcher. I didn't do a lot with this, but I hit kind of the guns on the main arms. And then I also wanted to add some to the top, so I used a little bit on the top vents as well, just to add a little bit of difference up there. I left my mech mostly green, so this was just a very slight add-on. Next was blocking in the cockpit. I just used a craft paint black, and I'm filling in all the cockpit windows to get those filled in to start. Then I moved on to a Chimera Red, and this is the start of building up kind of the center of our cockpit. So we can think of kind of an oval that covers all the windows. I'm trying to build up that oval with this red. And I used an air paint because that's a little bit thinner, and I find that a little bit easier to blend. Since it is thinner, I don't have to thin it down as much. Next I use a Dragon Red, and again thinking of a shrinking oval in that cockpit, so I'm doing a little bit less area than I did with the Dragon Red, and then I'm just bringing that in a little bit tighter. And then I did a second coat to really kind of make the center of that pop a little bit better. Then I finished this with a coat of Mod Podge gloss, and then once this dries, it'll create a nice shine to that cockpit area. Next, I want to add a little bit more to the model, so I downloaded these blast effects from Thingiverse. I will link that in the description, but I covered these all in a Neptune glow. These were printed on FDM, and as you can see, I drilled some holes and added some paperclip support so that way I can slot these into the arms. But I based these all in this Neptune glow just to create a light blue effect, kind of mimicking a PPC. When I first played MechWarrior, it was more of a ball effect, but I think this mimics the new style design a little bit better. Then I covered them all in a Drakenhof Nightshade. This is adding a little bit of depth. And then I did a dry brush of Marine Mist, hitting all the highlights with that just to bring out those raised edges. And then the final effect was I added just a standard white, hitting kind of with a brush on those top edges, just adding a little bit more of the streaked particle effect. Alright, the paint job is done. So let's get some glamour shots of the final finished mech. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, please like and subscribe for more. If you guys have any other ideas for large things I should print, whether it's kit cards or something else, please put those in the comments below. Anyway, I hope to bring you more 3D printing and hobby projects here soon, so please stay tuned. Thanks.